Hey there. Today I'm going to be talking about the constant battle that we wage over the course of the game of Marvel Crisis Protocol between priority and points. My name is Nate, and welcome to the Gamers Guild. Today was originally going to be a battle report featuring Dormammu and the Dark Dimension affiliation, which is really not an affiliation, it's just a bunch of characters thrown together, versus Green Goblin in his newest update, as well as just several of the new spider foes that I haven't got to showcase on the channel yet. Unfortunately, some technical stuff that we didn't know about until after we had recorded the game has come up, and we were not able to put that together in a form of a very watchable battle report, to be honest. But I think that's going to be okay ultimately, because the game ended up being a pretty one-sided after turn two for multiple reasons, and I really want to be able to showcase both sides a little bit more than what we were able to. And one of the big things, one of the big turning points that I came away with from that game is the battle of priority versus points. And so I ended up coming away with 5 different takeaways that I think are good to be trying to keep in mind, because there's never going to be a right answer, priority versus points. There are going to be times where you need to score points and priority just doesn't matter as much, especially because that means you get last activation. So that's moving on to an objective. That's maybe the chance to daze somebody else and grab their objectives, and your opponent just doesn't have a chance to respond. Where priority is obviously really good because you have the first action. You get to probably daze or KO an enemy character before they get to do anything that round. So it goes back and forth. The first thing that I think everybody should keep in mind is how fast does the crisis score, specifically the pairing of the crises, and how swingy then are those points. Just for example, something like Riot Spark over Extremis versus a Deadly Meteors mutates Civilians. So Riot ends up scoring about at a max 4 per turn. And really, like if you get lucky, you're probably scoring 3 of those. There's not going to be very many cases unless it's like the absolute end game where you're scoring all 4 of those. On the other side, Deadly Meteors scores a very one-sided 3, where Riot Spark can be a both people score 2. Deadly Meteors is going to be a much more sizable swing. So in those cases, there's a pretty good argument for saying, hey, maybe points are going to be a little bit more important here, and because that swing is really big. But additionally, the speed of the crisis matters, because the slower they score, the more time there's going to be to play the attrition style and have late game scoring instead of early game scoring, by just out dazing, out KOing your enemy models. So if you have a very fast scoring or very swingy style of objectives, I usually would think leaning towards the points is going to be the better way to do it. Whereas something on like Riots, and maybe you have one of the extracts, there's only one of them, but it scores 2 points. Scoring 4 a turn max, some of those times, is going to be a lot slower of a game than somebody who is able to score 8 or 10 possibly in a single round on something like Gamma and Cubes or Spider Infected. So those faster games, I think it's important to keep your eye on the points a little bit sooner into the game, whereas a little bit slower, you can take your time and make it up in the long run. My second point is look at what your team wants to do. What is the play style that affiliation is trying to do? Are they objective focused or attrition? Some great examples of this, of objective focused teams, are going to be like the Web Warriors and the Criminal Syndicate. Kingpin's leadership revolves around the objectives, and the Web Warriors, they get benefits from being on objectives with the modifying skulls, but even just their team, especially if you swap over to the Amazing Spider-Man's leadership, gives them some repositioning on their enemy characters. And then there's so many inaffiliation throws and pools that don't even care about size that they have a very strong objective game and kind of want to be able to go last to get last say, similar to Crime Syndicate, where one healthy character can add two healthy counts as bodies for objective scoring. And so getting the last activation with these two is very helpful. And there's not very many heavy hitters in those affiliations. I guess there's MODOK for Criminal Syndicate, which is a little bit more niche and not necessarily always wanting to bring in the big hit with them. On the other side of it, you have teams like Black Order or Asgard or the Avengers with the Sam Spam that are a little bit more attrition focused, that they might give up some points early on so that once multiple of the enemy characters are dazed or KO'd, they have a much easier time holding on to points and start just securing, mostly because there's nobody left to contest. These kind of teams that are going to have very impactful activations, especially early on, usually want priority so that they're able to have those activations uncontested. And don't really care about who goes last quite as much, because if their game plan goes according to what they want, by the end of round 3 or 4, that last activation your opponent's getting just doesn't matter as much. My third thing to keep in mind is how many points are you sacrificing for priority? So the first 2 points are kind of a little bit more, you can kind of determine this going into a match. You look at the objective, you look at your team, and are kind of able to be like, okay, cool, this is a game where I need to fill in the blank. However, once you get into the game, there's going to become more and more situations where it comes down to a turn by turn choice of, hey, I currently have priority. If I want to keep having priority, I can only daze X number of characters before they activate. So by doing that, you also then have to be like, okay, well, if I daze that character that's standing on that point over there, does that mean how many points am I giving them, or how many points am I not scoring for yourself? And I guess this one really leads into my next point, and that is, what round of the game is it, and how many more points do you and your opponent need to win? And so sometimes it's definitely worth stepping away, stop looking at all the models and stuff, take a moment to breathe, and just count up, okay, how many points can I score in a round? How many points does my opponent need to score in a round for the game to be over? And so there are times where you can kind of begin to see, okay, I need to go and do this in turn 3, even though it's not going to do very much during turn 3. Round 4, it's possibly going to stop my opponent from just scoring enough points to win. So keeping an eye on objectives is going to be extremely important. And if dazing a character means that their turn 4 win is going to be much more difficult by dazing or KOing somebody on turn 3, sometimes it's worth going for that extra length. And of course, the other side of that card, and my final tip for this, is what characters are you leaving in danger if you score the points instead? So look at the board state and the health of characters on both sides. The big thing that came up during our game that led this, just made a perfect example, almost too good to be true, was I was going to have last activation with Wong for the Dark Dimension. And he was paired off against Lizard, holding a point. It was the Mayor Fisk witness, so it's worth 2 victory points. I had dazed all the rest of Justin's team. So then on the other side of the board, I've got Dormammu, Valkyrie, and Zemo. But Valkyrie and Zemo are going to be left at, basically, at the beginning of next turn, they will only have 1 stamina left each. Valkyrie's going to start out the turn with 9 power. Zemo a little bit less. He spent a lot of his starting the round at, I think, 3 power. So if Lizard goes and just stays on the point and doesn't do anything to Wong, Justin gets priority back. He doesn't score those 2 victory points because Wong sits on that point with him. Wong's not going to be able to do anything to Lizard realistically. maybe some crazy dice spikes, but uh, we rolled it out afterwards, and no, it was not there. Um, so there's this decision point of, is it going to be worth trying to just daze Wong, which was pretty easy for Lizard to do, and that's what he ultimately ended up doing. But then Valkyrie on the other side of the board, who only had one stamina left and 9 power at the beginning of the turn, was able to go and finish off Green Goblin and Luke Cage with an all you've got turn that really only cost me one stamina. That's all she had left. She was going to be an easy days otherwise. And so Justin did get his 2 victory points, but it resulted in 2 of his fully, just freshly dazed characters being KO'd. If Justin, on the other hand, had left Wizard and just said, cool, Wong, do what you want. Maybe I take a point of damage, maybe even 2. If that's the case, I'll use Healing Factor the following turn. And it's not a matchup that Wizard is worried about at all. But then a character like Green Goblin gets to activate on the other side of the board in between his Glider Ram, the long range pumpkin bombs that are throwing 6 dice now. He very likely gets the days not just on Valkyrie, but probably also Baron Zemo, since they're both only on 1 health left. And so the question of victory points versus character position is something that you really need to be able to look at when you're trying to total up how many points you need left to win the game. Pay attention also to, hey, if my opponent gets to activate this model by having priority, do I have any responses? Is there anything that I can really do to stop that character from just popping off? And so in this case, Justin wouldn't have scored any points on that turn, and I would have gone up by 1 victory point. But then he would have also taken away 2 of my activations in a list of 4, and my only other remaining activations would have been Dormammu and Wong wouldn't be doing very much. So it was a tough point because there's also a little bit of feels bad when half your team or 4 out of 5 of your characters suddenly go down and get dazed, and you want to try to level that out. But ended up swinging pretty hard the other direction after that point. So something to keep in mind when you're playing your games. Still have fun. You don't have to get super competitive and number crunchy or anything like that. But every now and again, if you're wanting to try to get better at the game and trying to understand certain situations and end games a little bit more, to keep an eye on the points. And if having one character activate first is really going to be all that important, especially when you're in these teams like Web Warriors, where that first activation isn't necessarily going to just be wrecking somebody. Those are, I guess, my thoughts on this subject. I will say here at the end, I want to mention and just continue to support the sponsor of the Gamers Guild, which is, of course, Tritex Games. They have a slew of models that just aren't out in most other places in the world, unfortunately. The shipping crisis and everything is what it is. But of course, I now have my hands on the Midnight Suns, on Dormammu, and soon to be even the Convocation, because they're already out in the UK and they're able to ship internationally. So if you are also wanting to get in on some of that sweetness, use the code TritexGGCP5 at checkout for an extra 5% off. Helps knock out that shipping cost amongst other things. And as well, they now have the mutants. Juggernaut, Rogue, Gambit, Magic, Colossus are all up for pre-order as well. Plenty of good things coming in November. Fingers crossed we can get something in the US by then, but yeah, I'm really excited for Magic and Colossus. Rogue and Gambit too, don't get me wrong, but oh man, I'm so excited for Magic. Thank you all for watching, and I guess oh goodness, what am I doing? There's September's giveaway to draw for, so let me go over to that real quick. And September's winner is Seagull Hobbeth. I'm so sorry, I do not know how to pronounce that last name. But great model, but not sold yet. I will do some digging and figure out what comment this video came from. But congratulations nonetheless. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, keep on gaming.